Good evening, everyone, and welcome to CAHN's special, Health Hour edition. And tonight we're really delighted to be looking at, a particular topic that is of, real importance to within our community and tends to disproportionately impact our women. So we're really grateful to have Dr. Kenny Summboye, with us, and he's a consultant rheumatologist, but also to host this session and facilitate fielding your questions is Dr. Ngozi Ediosagi. So thanks everyone for making time. We're going to be live streaming the event on YouTube as well, so it will be a resource after tonight, that you can make reference to or you can share with, family and friends. So I will hand over to Ngozi to do, the introduction. But thanks, Dr. Kenny, thanks, Ngozi, and thanks to everyone for taking time to really engage with this. Over to you, Ngozi.
Thank you very much, Charles. My name's Ngozi Ediosagi. I'm a doctor in Manchester and I help to facilitate some of CAHN's health hours. I'm really delighted to invite Dr. Kenny Summboye to come and speak to us today about a condition that affects a lot of Black women. And even though I'm a doctor, it's not something I'm very familiar with, so I'm really looking forward to this health hour. So Kenny's a consultant rheumatologist in Leicester, and thanks to the wonderful Zoom, he can join us and give us I know it's going to be a really interesting talk. He's also an honorary senior lecturer at the Leicester Medical School, and he's involved very heavily with teaching and research, and he loves teaching. So I'm really looking forward to this evening. So as usual, please pop your questions in the chat, and I will put the questions to our guest on your behalf. Thank you so much, Dr. Kenny.
Thank you, Ngozi, for having me. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'd like to thank the CAHN group as well for the invitation. Faye, Charles, Liz, Karen, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. I love doing these patient engagement sessions. As Ngozi said, I'm passionate about teaching. I almost have to try and contain myself and rein my passions in. I just feel that the people that have made the best impressions on me throughout my medical career have been absolutely wonderful teachers. So feel free to ask me about anything. I like it when people sort of get their hat down and just ask me about absolutely anything at all. No question is silly. No question is too intellectual or less intellectual, as the case may be. I think these sessions are important, and the insight from the group is absolutely fantastic to set up these kind of very interactive, insightful meetings. So again, I'd like to thank everyone. So let's make a start. So why lupus and fibromyalgia? And now these happen to be two sets of diagnoses I'm quite passionate about. And as with every talk, it's always nice to have an outline so you can get a feel of how the night will progress. So we'll talk about what lupus is, how it's diagnosed and treated, and what patients, that's the most important aspect of any disease management, what you need to know and how it relates to you. The outline will follow the same format for fibromyalgia as well. But again, as I said, feel free to ask questions as you think them up. It makes the session more interactive once you ask questions as you think of them. And any burning questions that you may have had or wanted to ask your consultants, then feel free to go ahead. Interestingly, I run the lupus vasculitis connective tissue disease service at Leicester with a colleague of mine. So we do have a cohort of patients ranging from the very unwell to not so unwell. So we always regard Leicester as a hotbed of patients. So we see patients across various journeys. So some are extremely unwell and they come in extremely unwell, and some are not so unwell. And fortunately, majority of them are still fine despite the global pandemic that has hit. So systemic lupus erythematosus, so some of you might know it as SLE. It's fondly called lupus. It's a funny thing. As a medical diagnosis, it's one of those diagnoses that tends to be very popular, even on medical dramas. Everyone talks about lupus. Everyone knows lupus in some sense and in some way. But let's talk about history. I love history. I'm a big researcher into ancient history. I love ancient knowledge. I love all things history. Now, what's the history? Now, lupus obviously is a Latin word derived from the word wolf. In the
Dr. Kenny, your sound has just gone out there.
Can we get a message to him, please? Okay.
Hi, everybody. We'll try and get through to him. Yeah, thank you from the chat. We can see your messages. We can't hear him as well, and we're just going to try and get through to him to explain that we can't hear him.
I can't hear him either.
Yeah, I don't think any of us can hear him. I suppose if he has his phone, he's probably turned it off. Liz, if you try and stop sharing his screen, can you force him to stop sharing his screen so he'll know that there's something if we can't get through to him?
Try waving at him and saying we can't hear.
We can't hear you.
Doc, we can't hear you.
I don't think he can hear us because I've sent him a direct message as well. Hi, Dr. Kenny. We
Can you
can't
hear me
hear
again?
you.
Can you
We
hear
can
me?
hear you now. Yes,
Yes.
we couldn't hear you for about 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. It's
We're trying to get through to you.
yeah,
So,
let me just reshare the slides. Sorry about that. It's
yeah, so we unshared you so that we could force you to stop.
okay.
Yeah.
Are the slides back on now?
Yes,
that's
back
great.
on.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry about that. For some strange reason, the IT just seems to always go off Zoom on this work laptop. But anyways, yep. So as I was saying, so lupus is an autoimmune condition.
I think it was. Is this the first slide? We lost you, I think, on the second slide where you're talking about the history of lupus.
Okay, so let's go back then. Let's see.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay.
9, Nisa.
That's where we were.
Okay, so in terms of the history, I did say that William Osler was the one that came up with the term. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the chat open. So if ever there's an issue with the audio again, just you can just let me know in the chat. Or what I'll do is I'll put Liz on my screen. So if it ever goes off again with the audio, just prompt me, Liz, with a thumbs up. So yeah, just prompt me with 2 thumbs up so I know the audio thing has happened again. It just seems to always happen with this work laptop. Bear with me, I apologize about that. Okay, so William Osler, as I was saying, so he's actually a Canadian physician. He's very popular in medical circles. And what William Osler did was he founded the Royal Society of Medicine. He realized that lupus is not just a disease of skin involvement alone, that it actually affects the internal organs. That's what William Osler discovered. And this is quite interesting that he did that as far back as the late 1800s, which is quite interesting that one would think medicine may not be as far as advanced as of then, but it was quite advanced that he was able to do that. And from then on, we've had this spiral of information and technology and research when it comes to the management of lupus and how things have progressed. So again, what is lupus? So lupus is an autoimmune disease. Auto means self, immune. One thing that's very interesting is the pandemic has allowed the popularity of antibodies, immune system, and the rest of it. It's something that we're more and more aware of when we hear about it. So essentially what happens is the body produces proteins. It's seen as foreign by the body, and it starts to attack it, wrongly so. And wherever these proteins are present, the body just attacks it and just continues to do a very good job of it, so to speak. Now, I'm going to try and keep the talk as simplistic as possible because I know that most people are on various parts in their patient journey, and I do want to cater for that. So I'll keep it simplistic enough so that it caters for various people to be able to understand the ins and outs and the bits that I really want you to take away from it. So you can imagine the proteins being produced by the body, and there's damage by the body itself. So wherever those proteins, which we call antigens, are present, there's damage. So if it's in the kidneys, you get kidney damage. If it's in the skin, you get skin damage with scarring. Sometimes it can affect the eyes, not so common. Sometimes it can affect the lungs, not so common. Sometimes it can affect nerve tissue. So it's a very nasty disease. We refer to lupus in medical circles as the great mimicker. It likes to mimic other diseases. So it would look like a different disease. Then when push comes to shove, the truth comes out. What causes lupus? It's a chronic condition, as we like to call it. Chronic means chronic doesn't refer to severity. It refers to how long the disease grumbles along. So what that means is lupus is not the kind of diagnosis that would start yesterday and today you have symptoms. It tends not to do that. It tends to be fully established and would have grumbled for many days, many months, many weeks, many years before it is often picked up. But some patients have a very dramatic presentation where they've had issues dramatically. Either they've had problems with their kidneys and that presents with an acute admission to hospital. That can happen. But essentially the cause is unknown, but we know that genetics and family inheritance plays a huge, huge, huge part in lupus. Now, if I give you some numbers, if a mother has lupus, she's 8 times more likely to pass on genetic material to a child. So that's very, very relevant. The environment also has a part to play. When I say the environment, we know that some people go on a beach holiday and they come back and they have their first symptoms of lupus. Why is that so? We know that sunlight via its ultraviolet rays has a big part in triggering lupus and sometimes causing a lupus flare. But I've attached a list of triggers for you on the screen to be aware of. So infection is a problem. Some people have had COVID and have presented with their first episode of lupus, or lupus has been grumbling in the background and they had a COVID infection and then they presented with full-blown lupus. So again, infection can be an issue. Stress. This can be work-related stress, mental stress, physical stress, emotional stress. All sorts of stress can bring on lupus, and that can be a problem as well. Medication is also a big factor, which is why we like to take a medication history to ensure that that isn't something to be looked at. Smoking, again, is an important one. I always like to tell my lupus patients, if you smoke, you will blunt the effect of lupus drugs. And if you smoke, you do worsen your outcomes. So smoking is a big no-no. And I am entitled to say that because why? I once smoked myself, haven't smoked in what? 21 years. So it's a habit that's just worth getting rid of. It's just not worth it. Causes all sorts of problems. So just not worth it. Now, certain types of hormones can cause problems as well. Again, when we say hormones, sex hormones can be a problem, especially in women where you have undulating sex hormones for a number of reasons. And some may need to take hormone therapies because they've hit early menopause. That can be an issue sometimes in triggering lupus, but usually the genetic template is the big issue, where you need that template, like a hot template, and then you need like a second hit to cause the lupus. Now, anyone can get lupus, again, but it tends to be women within the childbearing age. So we'd say about age 15 to 44. But again, children can have lupus, but it tends to be rarer in the children age group. It's usually about 15, 16 to about mid 40s, sometimes late 50s. But that's not to say women in their 50s or 60s can't get it. Obviously, lupus as a diagnosis is more common in women. The ratios are far higher in women. We're talking about ratios of, for every 10 women, it affects just one man. So it's a big deal. You would say it's a disease that is by far astronomically higher in women. And if you talk about the prevalence, when we talk about prevalence in medicine, it just refers to the amount of patients present in that lupus pool. So we have about 28 per 100,000, and these are UK figures. But these figures are obviously higher in the Afro-Caribbean setting. So in the Afro-Caribbean community, the prevalence will be about 208 per 100,000. So it's higher, understandably, because lupus has a race predilection. So if I arranged races as an inverted triangle, you would find that people of African or Afro-Caribbean descent will be at the top of this inverted triangle. And as you go further down, you'd have South Asians, you'd have Hispanics, but Caucasians are at the very bottom. That's to say, if an African lady or Afro-Caribbean lady pitches up to my clinic with symptoms hinting at lupus, she most likely has lupus. That's pretty much the point I'm trying to make, mainly because we know it's very common within that race itself. And I've already mentioned that genetics has a big part to play. So if a mom has lupus and daughter's showing signs, you should get tested. Just go around to your GP, get tested, get the GP to do an assessment. Very important. Now, which organs are affected in lupus? Lupus is the great mimicker, as we call it in medical circles. It can affect absolutely any organ. So from brain to lung to joints to kidneys, the blood test can be distorted. You can have low counts, profoundly low counts. The skin can be scarred. It can be a massive issue when it comes to the way it presents and the way the organs can be affected. So we call it the great mimicker for that very reason, because it just affects a plethora of organs, and it just causes very bad downstream effects. So we call that the great mimicker, and that's typified by this cartoon I have displayed. Now, it's important we talk about the types of lupus. Again, the way I presented the slides, I know there's such a lot to talk about in lupus. I'm trying to crush all the lupus knowledge that would be relevant to you into 30 minutes or so, which is difficult to do. But again, I think we should talk about the types of lupus because it's important to talk about the types. I've alluded to two of the types to start with SLE, which is the systemic form, meaning systemic in that it's affected lots of organs, meaning it's affected skin and kidneys, or skin and nerve, or skin and joints, or skin and brain. So we call that a systemic presentation of lupus. And obviously we've talked about the skin confined type, which again can be either discoid or just plain non-discoid presentations of it. We have the drug related type, what we call the drug-induced lupus, which is caused by medication. Again, that can be a problem. And what we do is once you try and unpick and tease out the actual medication, there's the culprit that would allow you to dispel, remove the trigger and just have it sorted out. Then this will be relevant to Ngozi. We're talking about it before we kicked off live. Neonatal lupus, it's a problem. What that means is women that have lupus pass on certain proteins to the baby. And we do monitor pregnant women with lupus for this to make sure this doesn't happen. Sadly, those babies tend to get a condition we call heart block. So their heart rate, it becomes extremely low at birth, but we do monitor for it. And as long as the monitoring is very intensive, it shouldn't be an issue. Fortunately, the incidence reduces with successive pregnancy. So if it hasn't happened in your first pregnancy, then the chances of it happening in the successive pregnancies become less and less. So that's the fortunate thing about neonatal lupus. What are the signs and symptoms? No two cases of lupus is the same. No two cases of lupus is ever the same. So I don't want you as the patient to try and use your journey to judge someone else's journey. Or if you're a mother worried about a daughter, don't use your journey to judge your daughter's journey. Just because you've had an aggressive form of lupus doesn't necessarily mean your daughter will have the same trajectory. It doesn't mean that at all. Symptoms will vary. Again, I've showed you just a mini slide of symptoms that can be common. People can have tiredness. Some people can have fever. Unfortunately, in this era, if you have fever or you're tired, then it's COVID until proven otherwise. So if you have any of these symptoms, except the presence of a rash or hair loss, make sure it's not COVID to start off with, okay? Because of the era we're in at the moment. But again, lupus, because it's a mimicker, people can feel tired and run down. They can have this unexplained fever. And because we all have access to digital thermometers, either the ear thermometer or the forehead thermometer, you can easily check your temperature. If you're hitting figures of 38, yep, is that better? Yeah, thanks for the heads up. I think that's a good system, Liz, to give me the double thumbs up when it happens. I don't know why this keeps happening, but I need to trade in my work laptop for a different one. But I'm sure no one will listen to me in this COVID era to change a laptop at this point in time. They keep complaining that they're absolutely skint. We've got no money. We've got no money. We can't afford it. But thanks for the heads up, Liz. So you were right in there. So if it happens again, Liz, just prompt me. This is not going to ruin our session. I'm determined to talk to everyone about lupus. Okay, so again, if you're tired for any reason or you have a fever, then by all means, make sure it's not COVID to start with. Don't just assume it's lupus. And if you have these symptoms after you've had a COVID infection, it doesn't necessarily mean it's lupus. So bear that in mind. Lupus is still rare if you think about it in the general context. So again, all the symptoms I put up doesn't necessarily mean those are the symptoms that people have. Some people can have other issues, so do bear that in mind. How is it diagnosed and treated? I think that's something we need to talk about. In fairness to GPs, if there are any GP colleagues here, it can be quite difficult to diagnose if you're a non-specialist. If you're not a rheumatologist, it can be difficult to diagnose. And I have to mention that. In fairness to me, I'm a rheumatologist. It's difficult for me to miss cases of lupus unless the very extreme ones, especially if you're not been able to unpick the history properly. But for all intents and purposes, majority of lupus cases will be picked up. So if as a patient, you're in a position where your GP or consultant is telling you they do not feel it's lupus, chances are that it probably isn't full-blown lupus that is going to end your life. So you can breathe easy. But how we make the diagnosis as clinicians is we take a history. You are the most important piece of the puzzle. The patient is. Tell us your story. Tell us your journey. Tell us what symptoms you've had. Then we get you on the couch and have a look and see if the telltale signs are there. Now, I always tell my patients that lupus isn't the kind of disease that sits on the fence. If there's a problem, it rears its head. If there's a problem with lupus, you would tend to know because it loves to cause damage. Lupus isn't a secretive disease that grumbles under the radar. It will rear its head fairly quickly. And some people end up having skin biopsies or kidney biopsies at the very start. So depending on what your journey is, you may be offered some tests to find that out. But again, specialists, what we do is we take all aspects together. We take you as a whole because patients, we're not just parts. A patient is a whole. So we take you as a whole to try and decipher what the actual issue is. And then we arrive at a diagnosis once you've shared your story to your physician. There are some, what we call some clinical parameters that we use to make a diagnosis. Again, it's not something that we should delve into, but I'm sure a lot of you have heard about an ANA test. A positive ANA test doesn't mean much on its own. It's a very common parameter to have in general population. For every 100 people that have an ANA test, 30 of them can have an ANA, so it doesn't really mean much without symptoms. And the more mature people get, the more mature you get, decades you get over the age of 50, you can have a positive ANA. So you have to take it in context. Having a malar rash, again, a discoid rash, ulcers in the mouth, joint pains, kidney problems, we take all that into account. Or having what we call skin sensitivity, so sunlight. Summertime is always a nightmare for most lupus patients, and we always advise SPF 50. How do we treat it? This triangle typifies how we treat it. So the key thing about lupus is to ensure that you drive down the activity that's showed by the red arrow, and you try and prevent infection being a problem by doing that, because infection is always the major issue. Majority of patients that sadly lose their lives at the start of their journeys because of infection. Once we get past that, the other peak we get with patients running into difficulties when they have problems with heart attack, strokes, and mini strokes further down the line. Essentially, the best way to prevent all this is to make sure you're taking your tablets steadily, you're being compliant, you're speaking with your rheumatologist if you have concerns, and do share your thoughts with your rheumatologist and your GP. Engage with your specialist. They're there to look after you. We like to know your thoughts. We like to know your concerns. Then we can arrive at that common ground in teasing out and unpicking whatever problems we may think might exist. But I'm sure a lot of you would have had immunosuppressives ranging from drugs like azathioprine, methotrexate, steroids, some anti-inflammatories. But again, it's all in a bid to drive down activity. And there's some general measures. If you're smoking, stop smoking. If you're going to go on a beach holiday, SPF 50 as a minimum, wear a hat. UV is a big no-no. Sun intense areas, you just wear your hat and use a lot of sunscreen. You should be okay. If you're taking vitamin D over the counter, that's okay as well, because that's good for bone health. These are things you need to be aware of. So I'm going to just end with lupus in a few slides' time, because I don't want to overburden the lupus topic. I know there's a lot I still may not have talked about, but again, I know that due to limitations of time, we should talk about fibromyalgia, so we have enough time at the end for questions. So what do you need to know? Lupus can come and go. Be very minded by that. It can come and go. So you can have up and down pattern where you feel fine and not so fine, you feel fine and not so fine. And the flare can happen just unannounced. All these symptoms I talked about that are symptoms of lupus can present with symptoms of a flare as well. So bear that in mind. Stress is a big issue. And with this pandemic, we've had a few patients just triggering and having issues. Again, lots of stresses, lots of mothers having to homeschool. It's tough. And it can be emotionally draining. And even having COVID, strange virus that just really knocks off parts of the immune system and causes all sorts of havoc, is a problem as well. But remember, symptoms can come and go. Your job as patients is to be vigilant. Tell us if there's a problem. And your journey is not the same as anyone else's. If you're a mother worried about daughter or sister, your journey shouldn't reflect someone else's journey. Just take your tablets regularly. Participate in research. Research is very important, because today's medicine was yesterday's research. So bear that in mind. There's a big issue with heart attack, strokes, and mini strokes further down the line. So you just need to be compliant. Engage with your rheumatologist. Engage with your GP so that we can help you the best way possible. We as physicians are not your sage on the stage. We're just the guides at the side, just to guide you to arrive at that fantastic decision to make life better for you, more importantly, and for us in looking after you. So that's lupus. I'm sure there are probably lots of questions. You can put it in the chat and we'll take it at the end. But let's not deny fibromyalgia of its thunder. So moving on to fibromyalgia. Again, it's the same format as for lupus. I can see that Liz is still on standby to give me a thumbs up if the audio thing happens again. You see, that's the issue with what's regarded as free work laptop. Nothing's ever free in the NHS. There's always a price to pay. The audio keeps cutting off. That's such a strange thing. Maybe I should have used my personal computer in hindsight, but hey ho, it's just the way of the world, isn't it? Okay, so fibromyalgia, oftentimes called FM, especially if you're reading some magazines. It doesn't stand for FM radio. It's just a way of making it short, so we don't keep repeating fibromyalgia every now and again. Just the way SLE would refer to systemic lupus erythematosus, FM would be fibromyalgia. So what is fibromyalgia? Now, fibromyalgia is interesting in that people with lupus can have fibromyalgia, and people with fibromyalgia can have lupus. The way it goes is fibromyalgia is a diagnosis that is incredibly common. Fibromyalgia can coexist on its own, and lots of people can have fibromyalgia and have other things on top. So you can have fibromyalgia and blood pressure problems, fibromyalgia and arthritis, fibromyalgia and hypertension and diabetes, and all sorts of problems. It's that kind of disease. In the 1900s, it was thought to be due to inflammation of the deep tissues. But then we realized it's not really an inflammation. It's pretending to be an inflammation, but it's not really an inflammation. So the name fibromyalgia was coined in like the late 1900s, about 1970s, especially by a college of rheumatologists, what we call the ACR, where they put together, if you slide on your right, showing the yellow spots, where what we call these the trigger points or the tender points, where people have soreness across those points. Now, the soreness isn't confined to those areas. You can have soreness anywhere. That's what I find, but these are areas just for purposes of research where we like to confine those tender points. But fibromyalgia isn't just a disease of tiredness and pain. I like to call fibromyalgia a threesome, a triad of pain everywhere, tiredness, overwhelming tiredness, and your sleep not refreshing you. Now, non-refreshing sleep is a problem. I mean, if you ask me the last time I slept, woke up and felt refreshed, I would say this morning. If you're not waking up feeling refreshed, no matter how many hours you've slept for, 8-10 hours, you're feeling absolutely shattered, it's probably something that needs assessment. Bear that in mind. But we think fibromyalgia it's made up of a large group of diseases, which we refer to as central sensitivity disorders, something to be aware of. It's a problem. It's a big problem, fibromyalgia is. It's an overlap of many, many syndromes. We call it a hodgepodge, a cocktail of diagnosis. People can have issues with regional pain syndromes. People can have issues with depression. Some people can be bipolar. Some people can have post-traumatic stress disorder. Some people can struggle with panic attacks. It's on a spectrum with what we refer to as chronic fatigue syndrome. What that means is some people can start their journey at the chronic fatigue end and then progress to fibromyalgia. Or some people can start off with fibromyalgia and have chronic fatigue embedded within that. It's very common, fibromyalgia. The prevalence figures are that we're talking about 4% of the general population. These are huge numbers, huge numbers. And again, because of that overlap, you get to fibromyalgia. It can cut across various areas. Some people can have problems with memory loss, what they refer to as brain fog, just fogginess, forgetting recent events, just struggling to really concentrate. Some people have problems with swallowing. They get some people complain of heartburn. Some people have chest pain. Some people have back pain. And that's back pain. You've not had any problems with any injuries, and it's a problem. Some people have irritable bowel. Some people have problems with the bladder. Some people have pelvic pain. It's a huge hodgepodge of many syndromes. And you can see in the word cloud at the bottom, I've showed you various specialties that people can sort of go through just before they arrive at a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. It's a big problem, fibromyalgia is. And that typifies the ancient Indian story about the 6 blind men that an elephant was brought into town. So if you haven't heard the story before, it's an Indian story. It's quite ancient, but it's a lovely story about this elephant, massive elephant, was brought to a town where 6 blind men had to, obviously they were blind, they could only go with their sense of touch to decipher what this elephant was. So, and that's the kind of journey we find with other specialties. We're looking at fibromyalgia. Now, we rheumatologists, I like to regard us as the people telling the story. So we know it's fibromyalgia from the get-go. So one of the blind men touched the elephant on the trunk and said, "Oh, I think this is a thick snake." But it wasn't a snake, it was the elephant's trunk. Now, one touched the elephant on the tusk and said, "It must be a spear." No, it's not a spear, it's the tusk of the elephant. One touched the elephant's ear and said, "Oh, it's a fan." No, it's not a fan, it's an elephant, obviously. One touched the elephant's tail and said, "Oh, it must be a broom." because obviously the blind man had to go with touch. Now, one felt the body of the elephant and thought it was a wall.
It keeps going off, look. Is it him?
Back on?
It's him.
Is it back on?
It's back on. It's back
Yeah.
on. Thank you.
So I have to apologize for this. It's very, very annoying when this happens. Okay, that's fine. So I think I'll probably just ditch this in and get a personal upgrade. Nothing's free in the NHS, as I was saying. So again, so the last blind man touched the wall, the body of the elephant, and thought the elephant was a wall. So that mimics the journey that people with fibromyalgia get. They see a neurologist for their headaches. They see a gastroenterologist and he tells them they have irritable bowel. They see people we call the max fact specialists for jaw complaints. They might see a gynecologist because they might think it's PMS. They might see an orthopedic surgeon thinking it's back pain, and it can be a problem. But rheumatologists looking at this proverbial story can tell that it's fibromyalgia, because we know it can be far reaching and it can cut across various diagnoses and specialties. So very important that if you have symptoms, unexplained symptoms, speak to your GP. You may need to see a rheumatologist. It's a very common diagnosis. COVID has made that quite a problem in this era. So again, very, very important that if you think you have fibromyalgia, by all means, do get yourself assessed. Pain everywhere is a massive issue. Fibromyalgia tends to be commoner in women, and women tend to seek more help. They tend to seek more help because they just present earlier. Men tend to be men about it and suffer in silence. So men can be affected as well. So this is not just a disease of women, men can be affected as well. So unexplained symptoms, get yourself assessed, absolutely. Genetics play a big part. So if a mother has fibromyalgia, chances are that the daughter will have it, not because of genetic material being passed down, but we haven't quite found the intricacies of it, but we know that it's a problem. Family members tend to have what we call regional pain issues. Early life trauma is a problem. Stressful past events can trigger future fibromyalgia. Whether it's mental, physical, illness related, it's a problem. And obviously, people are having long COVID because of the COVID virus. I think long COVID, there are aspects of long COVID that has fibromyalgia on the inside of it. So it is a big, big, big issue in terms of the recent pandemic we've had and the explosion of fibromyalgia. But that said, we know that when we do some special scans in certain areas of the brain, the pain center of the brain called the thalamus, there are some hot spots within the pain center in the brain. So fibromyalgia is a real diagnosis because scientifically, we can see that there are areas in the brain that are hot and picking up pain at a very, very high level. So it can be a big issue. So it's not made up, it's a real diagnosis. So how do we diagnose it? It's you, the patient, just need to tell us your story, tell us what's happened. Then we follow the timeline. In my practice, I don't tend to focus on the trigger. I focus on the effects, how it's making you feel, because there's nothing really to be gained in trying to unpick the trigger. Oftentimes people can't remember the trigger, some people can, but it's the downstream effects we need to deal with. So if you've had tiredness, you're not sleeping, you're not refreshed, you're having memory problems, stresses of whatever kind, pain everywhere, probably need to be assessed for fibromyalgia. Now, I've highlighted that blood tests usually aren't of any concern in that you've had a blood test and your blood tests are fine. GPs are very good at doing some basic tests, which we like. Now, what you should be aware of in fibromyalgia is that avoid unnecessary testing. You do not want to be doing all sorts of exotic scans. You don't want to, you want to avoid that, because most times, if there's an issue in the brain or somewhere else, it would show very quickly. So avoid doing exotic scans off and on, because what you do is you get into this endless spiral of doing all kinds of tests and causing unnecessary anxiety. So once we've done some basic tests, and they're really good blood tests in picking up if there's some issues, if that's normal, then chances are that you're probably dealing with fibromyalgia. You don't need to go down the route of doing a CT or MRI or some nerve test. Not necessarily, unless your rheumatologist or GP feels the need to guide you down that path. Now, this slide just shows you the treatment principles that I think are quite important. the non-drug aspects of fibromyalgia is the main part I like to focus on, the non-drug part. So that refers to trying to make sure you look at your work-life balance, trying to see if we get your sleep hygiene up to scratch. If there are stressors causing fibromyalgia, it's best to remove it. I'll give you an example. There was a teacher I saw in my practice several years ago. Her job was the stressor. She was just in this stressed up job. And we had this discussion. I told her, try and look at the stressors. Oftentimes you, the patient, know where the problem lies. And she realized, you know what? The teaching was becoming a massive issue for her. She decided to start her own business, left the teaching profession, got a dog that she could walk to help her with the exercises. And that made a huge, huge difference. There was another lady that was, she was a fitness instructor. She had a level of fitness, but the advice I gave her was to change the exercise that she does, to modify it. So instead of high intensity cardio, to sort of tone it down to moderate intensity cardio. And that made a difference. So sometimes it just takes unpicking something you're doing in your life pattern that needs adjustments. And medication does have a part, a tiny part, but it does have a part. I mean, you can offer patients all sorts of medication ranging from amitriptyline, pregabalin, and the rest of it. The role of medication is to help your sleep hygiene. So you're sleeping for longer in a bit that it breaks that cycle of poor sleep, waking up in pain, being shattered. So it's just to break that cycle. That's the way to think about the treatment principles. I don't want to belabor the point any more than that, because it's nice to take questions from you so that we don't overload you with too much information. But the exercise is huge. It's a very, very important part in terms of treating fibromyalgia. It's very important. Make sure you get rid of the barriers. If you can't tolerate exercise, start slow and gradually build it up. Little as often as much as you can. That makes a huge, huge difference. And make sure you do it steadily. It's little as often as much as you can is the key. Consistency is key. If it's haphazard, it's probably not going to help you. So make sure you do little as often as much as you can. Start low and go slow. That's the key. Just treat exercise as medication. That's what I always suggest. And obviously, medication has a tiny part, but it does have a role to help you with your sleep hygiene. Some people with fibromyalgia may have been offered what we call CBT. Sometimes it's like a group therapy session so that you help each other as a group. I know some of my patients like to go on blogs to see where they can get strategies into diet, exercise, fitness. That's okay. Anything that helps, I'm not averse to. That's okay. It's a question of seeing what helps and just delving into it. There's nothing wrong with that. I think any little helps, as I like to say, when it comes to fibromyalgia. Now, what do you need to know? Fibromyalgia is a real diagnosis. Unfortunately, we have non-rheumatologists with this myth where, because they don't know what it is, if you remember the story I told you about the blind man filling on the elephant and not having a clue what it was, that's how non-rheumatologists are when it comes to fibromyalgia. It's a real diagnosis. It really sucks the joy out of the enjoyment of people's lives, and it's a real diagnosis. I don't play with it, and I don't belittle or I'm not facetious about it. It's real, and you have to treat it as real, and you have to attack it and do something about it. Obviously, the patient is at the core. The patient is at the core of making things better in terms of what to do and strategies. So very important. The aim is to drive down symptoms and improve your function. If you're non-functioning, chances are you're not going to get better. If you're non-functioning, chances are you're not going to get better. So we do have to ensure that we get you up and running with your functionality. A patient-led approach is key. What that means is you need to take ownership of the diagnosis. If your fibromyalgia has arisen because of something else, either because of lupus or thyroid problems, you need to take ownership of the main diagnosis. And the more ownership you take of the main diagnosis, that will drive down the fibromyalgia in a sense. But remember, the key is little as often as much as you can. That's the key. Start low, go slow. No rush. Rome truly wasn't built in a day. You just need to take it easy in your journey. Don't set unnecessary, unreasonable targets for yourself. Try and do what you can in terms of little baby steps to try and achieve your greater goal. Very important, so that you can at least track your progress in terms of your fibromyalgia journey. Very important. And I always tell my patients, it's a diagnosis in terms of management. It's really not a sprint. It's a proper marathon, and it has to be treated as such. Very important. So that's as much as I think we should talk about when it comes to fibromyalgia and lupus. It's important not to overload you with too much information in one session. I think it's very unhelpful once you cross the 1 hour mark with too much information on anything. The human attention span starts to dwindle off. I mean, when I'm teaching students, once I'm reaching the 1 hour mark, I start to panic, knowing that their attention span is going to drop off rapidly after that, regardless of how good a teacher you are. It's best to keep it well under an hour. So obviously, again, this is topical. The COVID vaccine, everyone's worried about it. Oh, should we not take it? Will it affect my lupus? Will it affect my fibromyalgia? What does this mean to me? It's a shame that the uptake has been really poor amongst Black and Asian minority ethnic groups. It's quite a shame. And I think there's a lot of myth that's gone around with it. There's a lot of myth. Some of those myths, I know there's some people strangely have spiritualized having the COVID vaccine as well. Some people have called it strange names like the mark of the beast and the rest of it. Strange, very, very strange. As a person of faith, I think that's ridiculous because true biblical faith is not at odds to wisdom. So you have to remember that today's medicine was yesterday's research. So anything we're doing now was something that we've always translated across diseases as well. Some people are worried about the speed of the COVID vaccine. You have to remember that the reason why the vaccine has been so speedily delivered is the amount of money that's been pumped behind it. Now, you have to remember that pharma companies in the past aren't really interested in vaccines. They are interested in making medication and at least making some profit to keep their establishments running. But the vaccine has had lots of resources plowed behind it. So government resources from the UK, from countries in Europe, South Africa, Canada, the States. So there's been a lot of money pumped behind it from various experts and brainy people across many countries. That's why, fortunately, we've been able to deliver the promise of a vaccine. If it wasn't for the sheer volume of resource in finances, this would never have happened. So that explains the speed. Now, in terms of the actual process about the mRNA, as they call it, mapping onto your molecules and generating antibodies, new technologies are always delivered for treatments anyway. I'm big on research, and new technologies are often developed in the first place. So don't be afraid of the scientific evidence. There's good evidence. And you have to remember, 13 million people have been vaccinated. You can't keep 13 million people quiet. If there's a problem, we should know by now, because 13 million people can't be kept quiet. 13 million. And these are 13 million of some of the most vulnerable people. If there was a problem with the vaccine, we would have known about it. People should be dropping off dead, and they're not. And this conspiracy about microchips and the rest of it, it's starting to really turn to silliness. So I expect as a community, obviously having the vaccine is your choice. You shouldn't be forced on you. But I always like to say an important caveat. Measles obviously can be caused by a virus, and it was well controlled for a huge time until we started to have anti-vaxxers. And now measles is making a comeback, which again is sad, which typifies that what we've controlled in the past, let's continue to control it with some common sense and looking at the evidence ourselves. Very important. Other viral illnesses, things like smallpox that have been eradicated, they were eradicated because of vaccine programs. You have to remember that. Vaccine programs have made a huge difference. A disease like polio, for example. Polio used to be very debilitating. Some people had polio and they have disability because of polio. That was eradicated because of vaccine programs. So let's look at the evidence ourselves and let's make up our minds sensibly and stop spiritualizing the vaccine. Now, remember that for people of faith on this platform, never think for 1 second that whatever your faith is, it should be at odds to wisdom. It doesn't make any sense. God is a God of logic, and he gave wisdom to man to produce vaccines. So remember that all knowledge is from the divine one, and don't snare it or don't condescend that knowledge. I have had my vaccine. I felt fine. People have said, oh, it's not made for Black people. Not true. You're not made of stone. Neither are you from Mars. We're human beings, and it's fine. I felt fine. And I think I might have been exposed to COVID sometime early in March 2020, but I still had the vaccine because I tell my patients to have it because it's the right thing to do to protect them. They're precious to me and they're precious to their loved ones as well. And it's important to do what's right by them. I've had the vaccine to protect them, to look after them, to protect my loved ones. And it's fine. As a big researcher, I'm excited about the possibility of a vaccine being developed to help people. It's a global pandemic. There's been resource poured into this to make life better. We as a group shouldn't lose ourselves and miss out on this. We've had lots of people in the BAME group die already. Let's be sensible and make proper decisions based on the evidence and looking at the facts ourselves. So that's me. And I'm happy for you to ask me absolutely anything at all. No question is too much, no questions too intellectual, no questions too silly. Ask me anything. And thanks for your attention, everyone. It's been wonderful to be here. And sorry about the IT audio issues, but it's one of those things. It's the era of Zoom with its nuances. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenny, for a really good presentation. So what I'm going to do now is that there are lots of questions in the chat, but also if you'd like to ask a question yourself, you can just put your hand up and I will ask you to ask Kenny directly, because this is an interactive session. So if you'd like to ask your questions directly, please just use the hand up function. So what I will do is just start by, whilst people get ready to put their hands up, is to ask you some of the questions that have been put in the chat, and there are lots of questions. This, from what you presented, it's quite a ubiquitous disease. It really sounds like one of the talks we had a few weeks ago about endometriosis. So one of the things that somebody has asked is, can you explain what discoid lupus is?
Yeah, so discoid, fantastic question. Discoid lupus is just lupus when it affects the skin. Now, the way lupus affects the skin, it can be very aggressive or sometimes it can be mild. Discoid lupus tends to be on the aggressive form where people get coin-shaped rash. It can be coin-shaped and quite deep, and it can leave scars either on the scalp or on the face. That's what discoid lupus is, essentially. Now, just because you have discoid lupus doesn't mean you will progress to the lupus affecting the internal organs. Bear that in mind. Just because you have discoid lupus doesn't mean it's going to affect the internal organs. Some people have their lupus affecting the internal organs, then they get the skin rash. Some people start off with discoid lupus first and may progress, but not everyone progresses. So that's essentially what it is.
Okay. One really good question as well is about the lifestyle changes. You've answered some of that. But there was a direct question about, are there specific lifestyle changes like exercise? What about diet?
Now, diet is good. Thank you, Ngozi. Diet is good, but I don't want you to go overboard with diet. Do you know what? When it comes to diet, I tell people, make sure diet is enjoyable. Diet has to be a lifestyle. If your dieting is a burden, you're doing it wrong because you're not going to be able to sustain it. Make dieting fun for you. It has to be enjoyable. What that means is, I mean, the rule of thumb I tell patients sometimes is your carbs, make sure your carbs isn't any bigger than your fist. I think if you're eating carbs more than your clenched fist, it's probably too much. So that's the way to think about it. Add in your leafy vegetables, add in your healthy juices, add in your clear fluids, but it should be enjoyable, your dieting should be, because what you need is a consistency. That's what makes dieting a success. All these exotic Atkins diets and keto diet and the rest of it, I'm not a big fan because remember, the human body loves balance. Life loves balance. If you start to do things out of kilter, you're going to run into difficulty. So make your dieting enjoyable. Exercise, but not too much. Moderate intensity exercise, but don't go overboard. I know there's an exercise regime called insanity and people go overboard. Don't go overboard. Everything needs to be in moderation. Remember, if you go overboard and you suffer an injury, you're no better for it. So everything needs to be in moderation. So it's a cocktail of things that makes a difference. Dieting, if you smoke, stop smoking, absolutely stop smoking. If there's one change you can make, is just to stop smoking. Smoking is a big issue because it blunts the effect of your drugs and it causes problems, harmful effects to lung and the rest of it. So that's a big no-no. And clear fluids, that's very important. I mean, we live in a temperate region of the world, so at least a liter, 1.5 liters of clear fluids, that's fine. balanced up with your tea and coffee and your juices. That's okay. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. And obviously your mental and spiritual health is also important, because I think you can't dissociate that. It's important. Once the soul is down, the body's down. But once the body's down and the soul is healthy, the soul can pick it up. So very important.
Thank you for that. I think good advice, but I know, speaking from personal experience, sometimes it's really difficult to get the diet bit right.
Yes, I know.
Yeah. Does lupus affect fertility? It's another question.
Yes, it does. Excellent question. It does. I mean, that's why I always tell my lupus patients, the problem with lupus is once you present with a flare or you have lupus, you're like in a constant state of inflammation. Inflammation is not a good template for getting pregnant. So take your meds. If your consultant has spoken to you to outline a plan for you, take your medication, drive down the inflammation, then your chances of getting pregnant becomes better. If you're not taking your tablets because you think they're toxic and hampering your chances of getting pregnant, that's a bad way to look at it. Because the way to look at it is the tablets will drive down the inflammation, and then you can phase out the tablets. Some tablets are safe to get pregnant on, and they really are safe. How do we know this? We've had patients that we couldn't take off the tablets because they've had catastrophic lupus and they just couldn't come off. Those patients had babies safely. So then we realize, aha, these tablets must be safe. So azathioprine is safe, hydroxychloroquine is safe, sometimes low-dose steroids is safe. So depending on the drug, if your rheumatologist gives you the go-ahead, then it's safe. If he hasn't given you the go-ahead, highlight a plan with him. That's why I said you, the patients, are so important. Speak to us and we can work together. We are not there to teach you what to do. You're an adult. We are there to guide you. The only reason why we're better is because we've gone to med school. If you went to med school, you'd be like us. Remember that. So I don't tell patients what to do. I need you to go with me on a journey to making you better. We are here to make you better. Talk to us. And yeah, but fantastic question.
Now, you described a collection of symptoms that, because you're a rheumatologist, when you see the patient, you think, this is it. In actual fact, they have to get through their GP to get to you. Are there any real key things that, as a patient, you think this must be it? Because the GPs are seeing lots and lots of people, and they're the filter to get to you. And some of them will be like those people touching the elephant, actually.
Good point.
What are the things that, as a patient, there's somebody here on the call now thinking, I've been to my GP, that sounds a bit like me. What are like maybe 2 or 3 things that are absolutely key that you think to the GP, I think I know, and I want to see a rheumatologist?
Fantastic question, Ngozi, and I'm glad you asked me that question, because obviously there's a wealth of information about lupus, and I'm trying not to overload people. But now, woman, hair loss. If you're waking up with locks of hair on your pillow, that's a bad sign, full stop. Now, I'm not concerned about you washing your hair or in the morning combing your hair and seeing locks of hair on your brush. That doesn't concern me as much. But if you're waking up with locks of hair on your pillow in the morning, that's bad. That means you have hair loss. That's a problem. That's usually a telltale sign that there's a problem. If you have joint pains, particularly in your hand joints, if you're unable to make a fully clenched fist with swelling in your hands or wrists, that's a problem. See your GP. Now, these are key symptoms. And if you're waking up with, if you have issues with the skin forming, your skin is throwing up a rash, either on the face, it has to be a persistent rash. None of this, the rash came this morning, it's gone by afternoon. No, that's not it. It has to be a persistent rash, there for 3 days, there for a week, there for a month. That's a problem. Get that assessed. Those are 3 key areas to be mindful of, because remember, lupus doesn't sit on the fence. If it's on, it's on, and that's it. And if you that tends to be it. It doesn't grumble in the background and just hide and hide and hide and hide. It doesn't do that. If it's true lupus, it will come out. You get telltale signs, either on blood tests or other tests. So excellent question. But I think those are the 3 things to be mindful of.
Someone's talked about tracking symptoms. Are there any apps that they have for the Rheumatology Society so that when you get there, you can say this has been going on for a while? Are there any apps that you know of?
Yeah, I think instead of an app, I think internet resources are probably better, because most apps, the functionality is a bit sticky and it's not really the best, because apps obviously are limited by the fact that you can't really crush too much in terms of functionality, or it becomes user friendly. So Versus Arthritis has some fantastic resource that used to be called Arthritis UK. So what that means is if you have any questions about lupus, just search Versus Arthritis.
You put that in the
then
chat.
tag Lupus at the end. Yes, I can, let me put that in the chat for you. So just type Versus Arthritis. So if you look at the chat, to everyone, let me just find everyone. So Versus Arthritis, then you tag Lupus at the end. So if you want information on your medication, you want information on your lupus, so just say Versus Arthritis, tag SLE at the end, tag Lupus, and it comes up with links. And you can read, and they're so patient friendly. I love reading them. And in fact, guess what? I do tell my junior doctors, registrars, to read up on the leaflets on what they need to know, because that's really good information. So have a look. It's a fantastic resource. And engage with these societies, volunteer, do some work, participate in research. That puts you at an advantage of knowing what's out there, what's cutting edge. And also the British Society of Rheumatology, that's, let me put that in the chat for you. The British Society of Rheumatology has some fantastic resource for patients as well. And obviously, prior to COVID, we used to have a conference every summer, but obviously COVID has paid that. But there's one coming up in April, actually, early summer, I would say. There's one coming up in April. And it's free for patients. Attend. It's useful to get information and find out more about your disease. The more knowledgeable you are, it will do you a wealth of good, because you'll be able to, at least, you become what we call the expert patient. We'll invite you, the patient, to speak to patients about what to be aware of. It's a fantastic resource.
Excellent. From what you've described, sometimes it can be really debilitating, these rheumatoid diseases. But people with these sometimes can have a really hard time accessing medication. And one of the questions is that, do you think this has a ethnic connotation? Is it because it affects more Black people that we haven't had enough research going into this? What's your experience?
Yeah, great question, Ingres. But do you know, there is research, and you have to remember that African Americans are also affected, and there's a wealth of research. We know what lupus does. I think a huge part of it has to do with people not engaging with healthcare practitioners early enough. If you engage with your healthcare practitioner and you care about your health, I think that's important. That's not to say that you don't care, and I agree, yes, it can be difficult, but if something goes amiss that isn't shifting in about a month, there's a problem. That's the way to think about it. If you have an issue that has lasted beyond a month and not getting better, it's time to speak to your GP. And remember, the GP has 10 minutes to consult with you. Be specific about the issue. If you want to drop a list, I don't mind patients to have a short list for me. It helps because it allows you to be focused. You've done your research, and tell me your story. Tell me, 2 months ago, this developed, it led to this, and this happened. It makes it very nice for your GP to track your symptoms. And once we hear those buzzwords, we know there's an issue. And speak to the expert patient. Karen has just said she's the expert patient. Brilliant. Speak to the... Is it back?
Yes, it's back.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I thought it ended. Okay. Karen has just said she's the expert patient. Speak to expert patients. Engage with the website. See what's out there. Attend the conferences. They're free for patients, and it would really help you in your patient journey. Don't be an island in your journey. Don't be an island. Make sure you speak to other people. Man is relational. We were built to relate with other beings. So relate with them, please.
There's still no hands up, so I'll keep on asking the questions. Oh, go on, Karen. That's it. Do you want to unmute yourself? There are loads of questions, I would say. I'll get to them.
Thank you very much. I just want to share with the group that I actually have lupus, and I'm very, very pleased and thankful that CAHN have allowed us to have Dr. Kenny tonight. But I think there's also the opportunity for everybody to ask the questions. People have been sending me questions personally and I've been putting them through. But I think there's something about, one of the questions that I would like to ask, I think I've put forward is, when going to the doctor, should one take a diary of their symptoms, and how might that help with diagnosis?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Karen. I don't mind patients that have diaries. I think you should take your diary. What would be helpful is give me a summary because obviously what you don't want to do is a doctor has 30 minutes if you're a new patient. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to cheat yourself by denying yourself that 30 minutes that is absolutely yours. So what I do is I let you tell me your story as you come in. So look into your diary, tell me your journey by giving me a good summary. For an example, you'd come in and say, okay, 2 years ago, I started to notice a rash anytime we go on holiday and my joints started to hurt. It's affecting my work. And now I've noticed I've got ulcers in my mouth and I just feel really run down. I can't do my work. These are buzzwords. Now you've said your story and what it's limiting you. Tell us your limiters. So patients do that. They go through the diary and they tell me what the journey is like. I like that because it means that you're organized, you're focused. And then you tell me what the issue is. Rather than pitching up and saying, have you got lupus? Yeah. What's happened? Okay, I just feel run down. What's happened to you? I can't remember. Yeah, was it 2 weeks ago? No, it wasn't 2 weeks ago. Was it? No, it's not really helpful because you are denying yourself the opportunity of allowing your rheumatologist to help you. So I love diaries. Excellent question, Karen. I think I do encourage it. Have your diary. Let us help you.
One of the other issues is that people are worried about being on medication for a long time because some of the medications you mentioned are can have quite significant side effects. Are there any what's the word for it?
Side effects, is it? Long-term side effects?
Alternative remedies, that's it.
Yeah. Now,
so alternative remedies that you can use.
Now, what I would suggest is when it comes to alternative therapy, when it comes to lupus management, it doesn't help everyone. And because it doesn't help everyone, the evidence is very, very poor. I don't mind the alternative therapy as an add-on. What that means is if you're trying a special kind of diet or a supplement, use it as an add-on, but make sure your rheumatologist knows. Because funny thing is some supplements interact with some of your tablets and blunt the effect. We don't like that. That's bad. So make sure you tell your rheumatologist what you're doing as an add-on. Some people talk about certain milks. There's something called kefir. I'll put it in the chat. Kefir apparently is very popular in Eastern Europe. I don't mind what you take as an add-on, but don't substitute that for therapy that works. Remember, there's been a lot of research into this. Lupus has been known to the 1800s, so don't disregard that. Whatever you use, use it as an add-on, but let your rheumatologist know, and he'll be able to guide you, because there are some websites where you can check what's the active ingredient in some of these supplements, and if it's a problem, get rid of it, because some supplements can interfere with your tablets and blunt the effect. So I don't mind what you do as an add-on, but don't use that as sole therapy. I know sometimes it's fashionable to go on some websites and WhatsApp videos where some people say, don't take your medication, it's poisonous. No, that's ridiculous, because those individuals, you do not know who they are or what journey they've had. Don't let them ruin your life. Take your tablets. People get better. And you have to remember, I've seen patients, young patients, I've managed patients as young as 19, well, younger than that I've led them through their journey. One of my success stories is my patient came in very unwell, and she's now a blogger for lupus. She's better. She's been to school. She's been past school, and it's wonderful to see her in her journey. She's now become my expert patient, and my eyes glow when I see her, because I've seen her through her journey. She's now the expert patient, blogging, telling people about lupus. Such a joy. How did she do it? She engaged. She followed the process, and we have this adult conversation where she says, Dr. Kenny, do you know what? I think I should reduce the dose of my drug. And I say, why? I say, okay, I feel better. And I think reducing it, let's give that a trial. I say, okay, let's try that for the next 2 months. Let's see if it makes a difference. I'll call you to ask if it's made a difference, set up an appointment. Has it made a difference? Yes. Okay, let's stick with it. It's an adult conversation. Remember, I'm your guide at the side, not your sage on the stage. Tell us, and we can have a conversation.
I think that's really important for people to take charge of their own journeys, in a sense, because you are your expert. And what you've described, I always say to people, you take charge and you are your own expert, so that if you are not responding, it's for you to be able to describe that. Now, there's another question here about, are lupus and fibromyalgia, are they recognized as disabilities?
Fibromyalgia is, you are entitled to get a badge. I mean, and your lupus, depending on the organ that's been damaged, you are entitled to some level of support. So what that means is, if you're working within an establishment, make sure your employers know. Every business tends to have an occupational health department. So get in touch, let them know you, so that you can be supported through your journey. Don't suffer in silence. If you have fibromyalgia, you are entitled to some support. It's not a lot, but you are entitled to it. I'm mindful that some people are asking questions and I can see them. Someone's asked about ulcers in the mouth. What do they show? Ulcers in the mouth means that you may have a flare. But remember that not all ulcers are lupus. But if you already have lupus, if you have more ulcers, you may have what we call a flare. So you might need a mouthwash or some steroid mouthwash. Just tell your rheumatologist or your lupus nurse. Let them guide you. So that's pretty much it. Just be in the know as to what's happening with your journey, and you won't go amiss if you do that.
What's the difference between fibromyalgia and polymyalgia?
Excellent question. Now, fibromyalgia, as we talked about, is you think of it as a condition that can come on its own, or it can come with lupus and other conditions. It can come with lupus and thyroid problems, lupus and diabetes, lupus and kidney problems. It can coexist with lots of things, and it's a diagnosis in its own right. Polymyalgia is a diagnosis we make in people well over the age of 50. The more decades you are over 50, the more likely you may have polymyalgia. And it tends to be very Caucasian specific. But it can happen in people that are non-Caucasians, but we tend to see it more in people of Caucasian ethnicity, but it can happen in other ethnicities. But polymyalgia, the giveaway is a blood test. But fibromyalgia, the blood test is often normal. That's the way to think about it.
We've got a question about saying that her medication has been changed quite a lot, 3 times now, and medication is making her really tired. This is someone who has fibromyalgia. Any advice?
Excellent question. Do you know what? The tiredness is most likely the fibromyalgia. The bane of fibromyalgia is the fatigue. It's horrible. It's an overwhelming fatigue, and it just really knocks the stuffing out of you. So what I advise is what I call a traffic light system, and I'll share with you because I tell my patients this. So I always take time to explain to my patients about a traffic light system. So a traffic light system means on a green day is a day where you feel fine, your energy levels are good, carry on as normal on a green day. So do what you need to do on a green day, less delegating, live your life. An amber day means that you should do some delegation, get people to help you where you need help. The mentally tasking jobs, do that first. And so that if you have energy for anything that's left, you can either delegate or you save it from a different day. A red day is a day, it doesn't mean sit around or lie around doing nothing. It means you should then delegate more. Do hardly any arduous tasks. You can do the little tasking jobs, lots of it, but delegate more. Share your burdens more. So if you have an uncle or sister that can help you with the milk, shopping, get that done on a red day. Don't try and shop it all in one day. Now, if you would normally do a task in 2 hours, on a red day, you might need to do it in 6 hours, and that's okay. Remember, that's a red day. That's okay. An amber day, you can obviously do it in less time, and a green day, you can do as you please. So traffic light system, it does work. So be mindful of your red days. Don't be a superhero. Don't be Wonder Woman on your red days. Make sure your red day, delegate more, get help. If it's work, get someone to do tasks for you. Let your line manager know it's a red day, I'm struggling. Lying around doesn't help. It's like oversleeping. When you oversleep, you wake up and you feel shattered anyway. So don't oversleep on a red day. A red day means you need to be on the go, but you're allowed to delegate more, but be on the go anyway. That will help you at the end of the day.
I think that's a really helpful analogy because it's almost like giving yourself permission to slow down.
Absolutely.
And so that you're recognizing that today's not a good day. And it means that your family and friends, you're giving them the opportunity to help, because I know that for many of us, you want to be on the go. You don't want to stop. You want to do the things that you need to do. So I think that's a really helpful analogy.
Yeah.
There's some medication related questions here.
Yeah.
So one of the questions is, how does hydroxychloroquine help the patients with lupus?
Yeah, I mean, fantastic question. Now, there's a professor that used to say, left to him, he would want to crush hydroxychloroquine and put it in the water supply of all lupus patients. It's that important. Hydroxychloroquine, we regard it as what we call an immunomodulator. What that means, it speaks to the immune system. Let me give you an analogy that I give to a lot of my patients. And I use a lot of analogies to explain things to my patients because I think it helps to really understand what we're doing. Now, think of a terrorist situation. Sorry, it's not the best analogy, but it helps. It proves the point. Hydroxychloroquine is like a policeman with a baton, but he knows martial arts. He's trying to talk down the villain, and he uses his martial arts to take him down. So he's not shot anyone, no damage, no one's been killed, job done. That's what hydroxychloroquine does. It's like the negotiator. Calm down, don't do this, think about it, it's gonna be okay. So no harm done. Then the other medication are like the troops, the police, the MI5, the SWAT team, the Navy. So that's the way to think about it. So it's a very good drug to speak to the immune system, to calm it down. So when your immune system is playing up in lupus, say it's going up to, your immune system should be 100%, it's playing up and going to 150, 200% and starting to attack you. Hydroxychloroquine is like that calming influence that just calms it down. Like a child in a very posh sitting room, splashing paint on the carpet, smashing the mirrors, breaking the telly. Hydroxychloroquine is like a super nanny that says, calm down, don't do that, and keeps that child in a uniformed sitting room wear, calming down. That's the way to think about it. So it's a good drug. I love it. I use it a lot. It works. And obviously it's been made popular in this COVID era because it works. And don't be afraid of problems with... Say again?
It works, but not against COVID.
Yes, it works, but not against COVID. So I'm not spitting any controversy here. It's been made popular because of COVID. Obviously, it's been called the Donald Trump drug, but anyways, but it's a good drug. And I think that's probably why people try to drag it into the COVID debate, because we know it speaks to the immune system and it does a brilliant job. So if you are on hydroxychloroquine, it's safe in pregnancy. The eye issue, as long as you have your checks regularly, it's a long-term issue. When I say long-term, I mean, the figures we talk about is for every 5,000 people on hydroxychloroquine that take it for 10 years, only less than 1% have an eye issue. These are good numbers. Don't be afraid. It's a good drug.
Okay, so there's Elizabeth, doesn't have the hand function, but she'd like to ask a question. So okay. Elizabeth, where are you? You'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question? And if anybody else has the same problem, just put something on the chat and say you'd like to ask a question if you can't find your hand function. Elizabeth D? No? Okay, while she's getting her hand, finding her voice, I'll just go on because we've only got another just over 10 minutes. There were two other medication-related questions. And so this was sertraline and amitriptyline for a number of years. This lady's been taking this for some time. And when she has a good night's sleep, she feels really well.
Good.
Recently, her GP has also prescribed her on omeprazole and duloxetine. But it hasn't had, it's very early days and it hasn't had an effect, but it does sound like quite a cocktail.
Yeah, I mean, that's not unusual to try a combination of drugs. Remember that some of these drugs have their strengths in how they work in various aspects. I think the key thing is, I'm quite a big fan when it comes to fibromyalgia in trying to make sure you don't neglect the non-drug aspects. Don't neglect the graded exercise. That's very important. So either you're doing your exercise biking, your swimming, your Pilates, your spin. Don't neglect those aspects, because what you find is once you're building up your exercise, naturally you get tired and you sleep better. That's not to say neglect the drugs, but some of these drugs, sometimes you need to balance it out. We might try a bit of duloxetine, a bit of the sertraline, a bit of the amitriptyline. That's okay. As long as the combination agrees with you and not causing more harm, that's okay. Remember that your GP and your consultant knows your journey. So listen to them and tell them what issues you're having. If there's an issue, then they can pull things back. And it's a question of you can do a bit of detective work. If you felt fine and drug X was added in, then it's okay to get rid of drug X. You tell us, and if you tell us, I'll say, okay, let's get rid of drug X and let's try drug Y. And if there isn't an issue, then that's absolutely perfect.
Okay.
Someone just asked that, yeah. Okay, yep.
We've got a hand up, so she came on before that question, and I'll go back to the other questions.
Okay.
So would you like to ask your question? Hi, Uzo.
Can I just say that it's disallowed, because when you were calling me earlier on, you said I need to be whatever.
Oh, unmuted. Okay, so
allow people.
Elizabeth Combs, can you just try and unmute people who want to speak? So Elizabeth D, you had a question before, isn't it? Sorry about that.
Thank you. Part of my question was the medication one, that I've been given 3, and it actually makes me even more tired. And the reason they keep changing it. So I wanted to know if there's an alternative, or maybe one you would recommend that might be suitable for, the BME people.
Yeah.
The thing as well is, how much effect does it have on your, on your mental state? Because
yeah.
From that cognition, sometimes for me it goes beyond just like the brain fog. I completely go like blank, and it's like I'm just empty. I'm not, even missing my words sometimes.
Yeah, I can understand that, Uzo. That's a great question, Uzo. Uzo, can I ask, how about the exercise aspects? How much of that are you doing? Because that's important. How much of that are you able to do in a day? Because I suspect that if you're not balancing the graded exercise aspect, you may notice that the medication isn't really helping you as it should do. So if you're able to balance that up, and sometimes, Uzo, that involves a bit of invention. I mean, I have patients that have had to get an exercise bike at home. Understandably, because of COVID, you can't go into the swimming areas anymore, or the sauna. All those aspects help. So hopefully after lockdown, I recommend using a sauna. That helps. I recommend warm baths and a warm shower. That also helps. But don't neglect your exercise. Something as simple as a 30-minute walk is a good start. Then you can gradually build it up to half an hour, an hour. That will really help. So let's not focus too much on the meds, especially if you're having 3 already. I think that tells me that we may be neglecting the exercise aspect. So I would really put more emphasis on that.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, can you unmute Uzo, please? So she can ask her question.
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
So Uzo, you're unmuted now. You can ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You're very faint. Do you want to put your volume up?
Yeah, is it any better?
No, we can't hear you very well.
Is it any better? I'm shouting now. I wanted to ask about if you are aware of this supplement called Moducare. Earlier last year, my sister had, we don't know if it's fibromyalgia, but she had pain that was migrating all over, and she did experience tiredness. There is a chemist that lives near my house, and when we went to him, he gave us a supplement called Moducare. And he explained it when you talked about hydroxychloroquine and what it does in terms of modulating, kind of like being a negotiator. That was the explanation on how Moducare works. She was taking 2 tablets every morning without food, and we would do some walking, like some walking in the mornings, and that helped. It helped. I don't know if it's fibromyalgia. But what you have described in terms of the migrating pain and the tiredness were the symptoms that she was having last year before she started taking the Moducare. So I just wanted to ask if you have heard of this supplement Moducare, and well, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent question. I mean, if it's Moducare, I'm actually just checking it up on internet now. I think the active ingredient is turmeric. So a lot of these supplements are just spin-offs of things that we know already makes a difference. So things like turmeric helps. We know that it helps with joint pains, but it's not the be-all and end-all, and it doesn't help everyone. I always tell patients that what you can get in a supplement, you can probably get it in your diet. If you're eating enough, your 5 a day is absolutely fine, and you're not denying yourself of your fruits and veg 5 a day, you probably do not need to take a supplement. That's what I would say. And remember, these supplement companies make an absolute fortune from spinning things that we know already helps. So I think what's probably made a huge difference for your sister is probably the walks that she takes. That's music to my ears. I love that part. I think that's the part that is often neglected. So whether it's winter, autumn, get your running shoes on, start off with a gentle walk, even if it's quarter of a mile, half a mile, that will make a huge ton of difference. The reason why, scientifically, anytime you exercise, your body produces what we call endorphins. Endorphins are feel-good hormones. They help with pain as well, and they make you feel more alive. It produces what the French call the joie de vivre. It gives you that joie de vivre, the joy of life. So I would really recommend that.
Thank you.
The lady has fibromyalgia, and she has a burning sensation in her legs, and she feels hot all the time, and is asking whether that's part of inflammation symptoms, and at the same time is also saying that she's got an underactive thyroid. Is that any link at all?
Yeah, remember what I said, that fibromyalgia can exist with lots of other diagnoses. So it's not unusual to have fibromyalgia and underactive thyroid. With the burning sensation in the feet, numbness, that's not unusual, but make sure you've had formal testing, because there's some other things like some vitamin deficiencies that can cause all those symptoms. So be mindful that you've had checks to make sure it's not a vitamin deficiency. Sometimes if you're lacking vitamin B, some certain vitamin Bs and folic acid, it can cause those sort of symptoms. So make sure you've had a test first. And if all those tests are fine, if your GP thinks you need further tests, he'll let you know. But fibromyalgia can cause that. Now, I didn't mention early on, but fibromyalgia, the pain center deep in the brain called the thalamus is just hot. So it's over-functioning. It's just picking up pain at a phenomenally high level. So symptoms like that are not unusual. The most important thing is that you tell your healthcare practitioner what you're having symptom-wise, so they can do the test. If it's clear, then yes, it may be the fibromyalgia.
Okay. Someone's asked, how does metopentalate work? Metopenolate.
So it's mycophenolate. Yes, mycophenolate. I mean, it's a standard drug we use in lupus. I love mycophenolate because it works. How does it work? It suppresses the immune system. So an analogy is, if your immune system...
You're talking about
mycophenolate.
Okay, it might be the same thing, but I don't know the drug. They've just put in here metopenolate.
I think it's mycophenolate. I think I saw that in the chat prior. I think it's mycophenolate that they are trying to spell. So mycophenolate works by calming the immune system down. So in that analogy I gave you about the policeman that has a baton with martial arts skills, mycophenolate is like a policeman with a proper weapon. Okay, and it works. It's almost like sniper fire type. Sort it out, deal with it. It calms the immune system down. So if your immune system is playing up to about maybe hypothetically 150, 200%, mycophenolate will drop that down to about 80, 90%. So you're feeling better. But it's a good drug. When tolerated, it does the distance. And interestingly, it works better for patients of Afro-Caribbean and African ethnicity. So it's a choice drug. If I had a patient, Black, African, Afro-Caribbean, I would tend to lean on mycophenolate as my choice of maintenance therapy. So worth considering.
Okay, one more one. I think this is where I'm rounding up now. Is about vitamin D. You mentioned vitamin D. There've also been a number of questions about vitamin D. When you talked about it, you were saying that people should just make sure they have normal vitamin D levels. In this COVID era, where they're talking about the effects of vitamin D, what's your advice about vitamin D? And
yeah, I mean, obviously the government's been giving out free vitamin D. Vitamin D is good for bone health. I don't mind vitamin D at all. I think it's a good drug. And obviously black skin doesn't use sunlight to make good vitamin D because it just doesn't. So vitamin D is great. Over-the-counter vitamin D, not a problem. I mean, there are various formulations. Some are sweet, some are chewable. It's a good addition to have. Someone's asked about methotrexate. Methotrexate is equally as good. I like methotrexate as well because these drugs work. We've used it. It works. Take your tablets, do your blood test. You will be fine. Very, very key. So vitamin D is good. I mean, it's not the be-all and end-all, but it's definitely a good addition to have, especially in the context of bone health and just your general cell functioning. It's good.
Well, I think it's now 8:30. I'm keen that we finish on time, and I'd like to thank everybody who dialed in today to listen to this. I found it myself really helpful and informative, and I'm sure that everybody who was on the call found that as well. So I'd like to thank you once again, Kenny, for coming and giving us a lecture. It's been really good. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And I think we will get you back on a Saturday. We will.
No
worries.
But
we have a different audience, and I think it will be helpful. Okay. Good night, everybody. Nice to see you. Have a nice evening.
Good night, everybody.
I've got to eat something healthy now, Dr. Kenny. Bye.
Bye.